Okay. Wow. Have you seen that show Yellow Jackets?
Yeah, I have.
Really gets under your skin, right? They go to
Yeah.
extremes to survive. But the cannibalism thing, like,
Yeah.
it's always such a tough subject, right?
Yeah.
Makes you think about what really is going on in our minds when it comes to killing.
Yeah, it's true. It's almost like that visceral reaction that you're talking about, like the ick factor. It might be more than just a cultural taboo.
Mhm.
And that's what we're looking at today. We're going to be diving into an essay by philosopher Ricardo Davila called Eat What You Kill No Matter What.
Okay.
And his take is that cannibalism, as unthinkable as it is to most of us, might actually hold some clues about how humans developed our ideas about, like, right and wrong, about killing in general.
So we're not just talking about cannibalism as like a historical freak show, but
Yeah.
like we're going deeper here, like into the evolution of morality itself.
Precisely. Davila starts with a big shift that happened way back when our hominin ancestors came down from the trees and started, living on the ground.
Mm.
And this is a point that Richard Leakey, who's a paleoanthropologist, really emphasizes. This move to the ground changed our diet. We started, having more meat. And Leakey really believes that played a massive role in how our brains developed.
Because our brains needed the extra like energy and nutrients from the meat in order to grow bigger.
Yes, and that connects directly to the need to hunt. So think persistence hunting, like chasing prey until it collapses from exhaustion.
Yeah,
It's a strategy that, like, requires a lot of brain power, a lot of coordination.
sure. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But we weren't just hunting to eat, right? We also had to protect ourselves from predators.
Exactly. And this is where things get, like, really interesting.
Okay.
Because our infants, unlike a lot of other animals, they're incredibly vulnerable. I mean, they can't run away, they can't really defend themselves. So early humans had to be able to kill not just for food, but also to protect their young.
Yep.
And that is a pretty big evolutionary leap.
Hold on. So like we developed this capacity to kill for two totally different reasons, eating and protecting, and both are essential for survival.
Mm.
So how did our brains handle that? Like, wouldn't that be like a recipe for chaos, not knowing when it's okay to kill and when it's not?
It's a fascinating puzzle, and Davila calls this challenge metabolic decoupling.
Metabolic decoupling.
Basically, what he's saying is that early humans had to evolve ways to distinguish between killing for food and killing for protection.
Right.
And guess what comes into play here?
I have a feeling you're going to say cannibalism.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I'm ready.
You're right on the money.
Oh, no.
There's actually a lot of archaeological evidence from places like Goff's Cave and Mula Gursi,
Okay.
suggesting that cannibalism was practiced in prehistoric times.
Gotcha.
Now, this wasn't always a savage, like, bloodthirsty act. Sometimes it was ritualistic, sometimes it was purely for survival, and yes, sometimes it even seems to have been dietary.
But obviously, like in modern society, the thought of eating another human is repulsive. So somewhere along the line, something changed, right?
Mm.
How did we go from potentially seeing cannibalism as like, okay, to like being totally disgusted by it?
That's where this whole disgust response comes in.
Okay.
Scientists like Tim White believe that it evolved as a protective mechanism.
Hmm.
So think about it. Eating another human, especially a dead one, brings a huge risk of disease.
So like natural selection would favor the people who are naturally like repulsed by cannibalism.
Right.
The ones who weren't grossed out, maybe they got sick and died more often.
You're getting it.
Okay.
And this ties into the philosopher Nietzsche's ideas about fear and morality.
Okay.
He argued that what we consider moral is often shaped by, like, our deepest fears.
Okay.
We learn to fear the dangers of cannibalism, like disease, pathogens, and that fear became deeply ingrained in our moral code.
So this visceral disgust that we feel, it's like a built-in alarm system telling us steer clear, basically.
Exactly, like a flashing red light. Danger, danger.
Yeah.
So think about the smell of death.
Yeah.
It's not just unpleasant, it's, like, primal, right? Deeply unsettling. I mean, even William S. Burroughs, the author, wrote about how disturbing that smell is. This visceral disgust is at the heart of how our ideas about killing, especially other humans, evolved.
Yeah. So we're talking about a physical, gut-level reaction
Yeah.
that actually influenced how we developed morally.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this relate to, like, the broader act of killing, not just cannibalism?
Well, consider this. What happens in your body when you hunt? There's that fight or flight response, right? Your system's flooded with adrenaline, preparing you to either face danger or run. And then when you kill, even if it's, an animal for food, your body is prepped for that next step, digestion.
Right. It's like our bodies are wired for this whole sequence of events, right? Hunting, killing, then eating.
Uh-huh.
But what happens when that final step, that anticipated digestion, doesn't happen? What if we kill a human and eating them is just, like, unthinkable?
Davila calls this cannibalistic indigestion. You could also think of it as abortive cannibalism. It's that uneasy feeling, almost a sense of shame that comes when the act of killing isn't followed by that expected act of eating.
So it's like our bodies are expecting a reward for the effort of killing. But when we don't eat what we've killed, especially another human, we get this, like, mental and maybe even physical discomfort,
Yeah.
like a kind of evolutionary hangover.
It's a really interesting idea, right? That there's this deep-seated connection between killing and consuming that we can't quite shake off. I mean, even soldiers who are trained to kill often talk about experiencing a strange, unsettling feeling after taking a human life.
Right. It's like we're still haunted by the ghosts of our evolutionary past,
Huh?
even when we're trying to distance ourselves to those primal instincts.
Right.
But what about people who don't have this disgust response?
Yeah.
Are there, like, exceptions to this rule?
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us into some truly fascinating territory because there are people who don't seem to have that instinctive aversion to cannibalism. And this might tell us even more about the complex interplay of our biology and our morality.
Whoa, hold on. My brain needs a minute to process all this. It's getting really deep.
Yeah.
And I think we need to take a breath before we dive into that next layer.
You're right. We've covered a lot of ground. Let's pick up this thread about those who don't experience that typical disgust response in part 2 of our deep dive.
So I guess we left off talking about how, for most people, the idea of cannibalism, is just, like, completely repulsive.
Mm-hmm.
But you were saying that there are actually some people who don't experience that same, like, level of disgust.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit of a mystery, but some people just don't have that typical cannibalism equals bad wiring in their brains,
Yeah.
And, like, exploring why that is can really challenge our understanding of how morality and biology, like, interact.
So is it all in their heads? Or could there actually be something, like, physically different about their brains?
It's likely a mix of, like, nature and nurture.
Oh.
A combo of genetics and those life experiences.
Right.
Some researchers believe there might be, like, a genetic component,
Okay.
a difference in, like, how their brains process those disgust signals we were talking about.
So, like, some people could literally be wired to be less repulsed by cannibalism.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about, like, the origins of morality.
Right.
Like, if disgust is so crucial to our moral development, what does it mean if some people just, like, aren't wired for it? Does that mean they're less moral? It's like a complex issue.
It definitely makes you think. But couldn't it also be, like, the result of something psychological? Like, I don't know, like extreme trauma or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear all those, like, true crime stories about cannibals with really, like, messed up backgrounds.
Mhm.
And it's like their experiences have somehow, like, broken down their moral barriers.
You're absolutely right to bring that up.
Yeah.
Trauma can definitely play a role in shaping someone's morality or lack thereof.
Right.
When people experience, like, horrific things, especially at a young age, it can fundamentally alter their sense of right and wrong.
And that's what makes those stories so disturbing, right?
Yeah.
These are people who have often endured, like, so much suffering that their perception of the world and their place in it becomes, like, totally distorted.
Exactly. But even in these, like, extreme cases where people seem to have crossed a line that most of us can't even, like, imagine there might be a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, Plato, wrote about this in his work Symposium.
Okay.
And one of the characters, a doctor named Eryximachus,
Okay.
talks about love from, like, a medical perspective. He argues that even the most unhealthy desires can be brought back into balance, that there's potential for, like, healing even in the darkest corners of the human psyche.
So even in the case of cannibalism, where the disgust response is absent or has been, like, overridden by trauma,
Yeah.
there's still a possibility for those individuals to, like, find some kind of, like, equilibrium, to heal.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? That even in the most extreme examples of, like, moral transgression, there's a potential for reconciliation, a path back to wholeness.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that even for those of us who are, like, wired for that instinctive revulsion towards cannibalism,
Yeah.
there are situations where those boundaries can be pushed, where survival trumps morality.
You're talking about this like extreme survival situations,
Right.
like the Donner Party, those pioneers who were like snowed in the Sierra Nevada mountains
Exactly.
and had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive.
The Donner Party is like a tragic but powerful example of how desperate circumstances can override our deepest moral inhibitions. You know, these were ordinary people, not monsters, driven to the unthinkable by the like primal need to survive.
Right.
And when you look at it through the lens of Davila's ideas, it makes you wonder how much of our morality is like truly unshakable
Right.
and how much is dependent on like our circumstances.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought, and it ties back to like those pop culture references we were talking about before, like Yellow Jackets, where a group of teenage girls, they're stranded in the wilderness and they're forced into these similar choices.
Right.
And there's that line from Lottie, "We won't be hungry much longer."
Yeah.
It just like sends shivers down your spine because it hints at that like dark potential that exists, within all of us.
That's the brilliance of stories like Yellow Jackets. They tap into that primal fear, that understanding that under the, right or rather wrong circumstances, any one of us could be pushed to those limits.
Right.
And the show doesn't shy away from like the psychological and moral complexities of those choices.
Yeah, and there's that whole layer of guilt and shame that comes later, even if those actions were like necessary for survival.
Yeah.
It's not just about the act itself, but the like long-lasting repercussions, like on the individual and on the group.
And there are historical examples as well, like the Siege of Numantia by the Roman general Scipio Aemilianus. That's a horrific but fascinating case.
Okay.
Appian, the Greek historian,
Right.
wrote about how the Numantines, facing starvation, resorted to eating their own dead.
Wow.
And what's really striking is that Appian focuses not just on, like, the act of cannibalism itself,
Yeah.
but on the, like, deep shame and despair the Numantines felt
Wow.
at having been forced to violate such a, like, powerful taboo.
It's a reminder that even in ancient times, people understood like the weight of this taboo, the like profound moral implications of crossing that line.
Right.
So we've explored cannibalism as this like evolutionary puzzle, as a potential key to understanding like the origins of our morality. We've talked about the disgust response, the exceptions to the rule, and those extreme situations that can push people beyond those boundaries.
Right.
But what's the like big takeaway here?
Yeah.
What is Davil really driving at with all of this?
Well, Davila's core argument is that our aversion to killing, especially killing other humans, might be a deeply rooted remnant of our like earliest origins, going all the way back to our single-celled ancestors.
Okay.
So he draws this parallel between our disgust at cannibalism and the process of phagocytosis.
Phagocytosis. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Sure, think back to high school biology.
You're right.
Phagocytosis is like how single-celled organisms engulf and consume other cells, so it's basically cellular cannibalism.
Oh, okay.
And Davila suggests that our modern-day disgust at cannibalism might be like a kind of echo of that ancient process, a way of protecting ourselves from harm.
So he's saying that on a cellular level, we still carry this like primal memory of consuming and destroying other cells.
Yeah.
And that's somehow connected to our moral feelings about like killing.
Exactly. He calls it metabolic inversion.
Metabolic inversion.
So killing, which was once an internal act for nourishment in our single-celled ancestors,
Right.
became externalized as we evolved into multicellular organisms.
Okay.
But even though the act itself moved, like outside,
Right.
it still retains this connection to our metabolism, to that primal need to consume and survive.
That's a mind-blowing concept.
It is.
So you're saying that even though we've evolved to like separate killing for food from killing for other reasons like protection, there's still this like ancient link between the two.
Yeah.
This leftover echo from our like single-celled past.
Precisely. And this metabolic inversion has shaped our like moral anxieties in profound ways. Davila suggests that it might even be the root of concepts like a bad conscience, that feeling of guilt and unease that we experience when we violate our moral code, particularly when it comes to killing.
So our deepest moral beliefs, the ones that we often take for granted, might actually be grounded in this like ancient biological imperative, right? To survive, to consume, to avoid being harmed by what we kill.
Right.
That's a pretty heavy thought.
It is, and it raises some important questions about our relationship with death in the modern world.
Whoa, hold on. You're throwing another curveball here. We've gone from cannibalism to single-celled organisms to, like, a bad conscience. My
Yeah.
brain needs a moment to catch up.
Sure.
Let's take a pause here and dive into this connection with death
Yeah.
in part 3 of our deep dive. All right, still wrapping my head around all of this stuff with our single-celled ancestors and how they influence our morality today, but you were about to tell me how this all connects to our relationship with death.
Yeah, so think about it this way. If disgust is this protective mechanism, a way of preventing us from consuming pathogens and getting sick, what happens when we create a world where we're, like, increasingly shielded from death, from the realities of the food chain?
That's an interesting point. We live in a society where death is, like, sanitized,
Right.
hidden away. I mean, we
Uh-huh.
buy our meat, like, all neatly packaged at the supermarket,
Right.
completely disconnected from the animal that it came from.
Uh-huh.
And it's like we've created this illusion that death is something that happens to other people,
Yeah.
not to us.
Exactly. We rarely see the process, the messiness, the reality of where our food comes from.
Right.
And this detachment, the sanitization of death, might have, like, unintended consequences. It's something Davila hints at but doesn't fully explore.
Do you think this distance from death could be making us less sensitive to, like, the weight of taking a life, even if it's just an animal,
Yeah.
for food?
Yeah.
Have we lost touch with something essential about our connection to the natural world, that cycle of life and death that sustains us?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Are we losing that visceral understanding of the consequences of killing? That deep-seated respect for life that, our ancestors had to cultivate in order to survive. It's something to think about, especially in a world where violence, both real and virtual, is often, like, trivialized, sanitized for our consumption.
So Davila's really challenging us to, like, examine not just, the origins of our morality,
Uh-huh.
but also how our modern way of life might be reshaping those, like, ancient instincts,
Right.
those deep-seated feelings about killing and death.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes his work so compelling, He's not offering easy answers or simple solutions. He's asking us to, like, confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the shadows that our evolutionary past casts on our present.
So we started with cannibalism, then went to single-celled organisms, and ended up in the modern world. Where do we go from here? What do we do with all of these insights?
Well, for me, this deep dive is a reminder that morality is not, like, static. It's not a set of rules carved in stone.
Yeah.
It's a fluid, evolving thing shaped by our biology, our culture, our experiences.
Right.
And understanding those influences, those deep roots, can help us, like, navigate the complexities of right and wrong in a world that's, constantly changing.
Like we've peeled back the layers of an onion,
Yeah.
revealing these intricate connections between our past and our present, the biological and the moral.
Right.
It's humbling and honestly a little frightening to realize how much we still don't understand about ourselves.
But that's the beauty of exploration, right? It's not about finding all the answers.
Yeah.
It's about asking the right questions,
Right.
challenging our assumptions, and embracing the, like, mystery of what it means to be human.
Okay, so if you could leave our listeners with, like, one thought, what would it be?
Explore these ideas further,
Yeah.
Read Davila's work, dive into the history of cannibalism, and, like, think critically about your own moral beliefs. Ask yourself, how does our ancient past continue to shape our present? And what does that mean for the future of our species?
Yeah, those are some big questions.
Yeah.
It's like a challenge and an invitation to, like, keep digging, keep exploring, keep pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
Exactly. And who knows what other fascinating discoveries await us on that journey.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. So much to think out. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.